Happy Friday. Happy Friday. Hello, everyone. Hello, hello. Thank you so much for joining us for this another Friday Lunch and Learn. We are truly happy to have you joining us here another Friday. This is where we meet each Friday at this time, and this is where we have those conversations. This is where we learn and this is where we grow. We want to thank you so much for joining us and spending your lunch hour with us. Here with me today, here with me today are my two co-hosts. There is Dr. Siegfried Howell. He's a life, relationship, and happiness coach and consultant, and he's also a master life coach. Also with us is Dr. Marcia Thomas. Dr. Marcia was not here last week, but she's back this week, and she's going to be the moderator for today's program. And Dr. Marcia is a also a consultant and coach. She does specialize in Christian leadership. And I am yours truly, Dr. Janice Brooks. I am also a leadership consultant and I am a John Maxwell certified coach and trainer, life strategist. I help persons with strategies to build their life. That's simply it. Dr. Howell, thank you so much again for coming back as our co-host this week. And Dr. Marcia, if you have any opening remarks, you go ahead and say that, and then we'll hand over to Dr. Marcia, the moderator for today's program. Dr. Howell?
Oh, yes. Yes, I don't have any comments at this point in time. I'm just ready to jump right in and get started because we have a very interesting topic. And I know that a lot of us are itching to hear what we're going to say because nobody likes difficult conversations. And so, if we can give you some tips and some strategies and some techniques into how to better maneuver around difficult conversations, I'm sure that we all can learn something today.
Oh, that's right, Dr. Howell. Thank you so much. Dr. Marcia, over to you.
Good day, everyone. Good day, everyone. I have a visitor with me today. And so we are going to be navigating this program together. It's a difficult conversation, another difficult, very difficult, but sizzling, complicated topic. And that's what we do. We keep you on the edge of your seat. And when you're finished with this program, you'll benefit to the max. And so today we are going to be talking about that little thing called difficult conversation, how to have these difficult conversations. And we want to share what we know and some strategies and tips that will help you to navigate your difficult conversations. One thing I'm very certain of, and I'm sure my co-hosts are also certain, that whether we like it or not, if it is even one time in our life, we have to have that difficult conversation, whether personally or in our workplaces professionally. Difficult conversations are inevitable conversations that we need to have from time to time. And so I want to say that in my experience, I have been in rooms where persons try to avoid these conversations. And I know there are persons in my audience who can resonate with my example today. I have been in situations where persons have not come up to the plate in my workplace professionally. And when I was a junior person, I was not in leadership. I used to find that my leaders, my supervisors, and those middle managers would come to a meeting and they would say, we all know who was coming late, but instead of saying and speaking to that person personally, they would say we are to make an effort to come to work a little earlier, and it is all on us. And when one person doesn't fit into or slack off, it affects everyone. Instead of just saying, having a private conversation with that person who is always late. And then there are persons who take every day that is due to them, they take that day. And so there are persons who would say, and come to a general meeting to say we are to be guarded and we are to make sure that we do not take too many days and so on, instead of coming to the point. You know what I mean? And so today I want to ask Dr. Howell, what would you say is a difficult conversation?
A difficult conversation is one of those conversations where there's a definite elephant in the room. There is some tension, there is some big obstruction, and that's in the room, and usually it's emotional. And so a difficult conversation to me is one that gives interpersonal discomfort, anxiety. You might get butterflies, unresolved tension, an opportunity to dig up emotions that you don't want to deal with. That is one of the biggest things right there, because it's difficult, because on the emotional level, there's something right there that is just bugging you or the other person, and you know it has the potential to either lead into an argument, lead into a fight, lead into words being said, or even worse. And you know, I like examples. So the example that I'm going to bring today is the one when the prophet came to David. You remember when David took Bathsheba and killed her husband, and the prophet had had the dilemma of going to the king and telling the king he'd messed up. Now, granted, he was the prophet, but you have to understand what kings could do at that point in time. If you look back at Esther, Esther couldn't even go see her husband without the threat of death if she wasn't invited. He had to hold out the golden scepter in order for her to stay alive and not lose her head. And so all of the kings around Israel, they had ultimate power. And so the prophet knew that there was a chance that harm could fall on him if he came and told the king that he had messed with someone else's wife, and God told him, hey, I'm calling you on the carpet. So he had to come up with a very delicate story about a guy who had one sheep, and there was a man that had many sheep, and the man that had many sheep went and took the one sheep from the guy who only had one. And so David was very upset about it, and he was like, who is this guy? Bring him to me. And then he said, thou art the man. And so he found he finessed a very easy way to deal with it. But was it really easy? He had to put a lot of time, energy, and thought into coming up with an emotionally stimulating entrance into that conversation. And so a difficult conversation is one where you really have to put time, energy, and thought into how you're going to start it and how you're going to go through it without bringing up emotions that can lead to the harming of a friendship, the loss of an employee, or people just going fisticuffs, fighting blows, or somebody getting harmed.
Wow.
That is as sensitive as it can get. It couldn't get more sensitive than that. And so we are sure that a difficult conversation has a very high sensitive vibration. Very, very high. Thank you so much. And those are perfect examples. Let me hear you, Dr. Brooks.
Well, you know, I have been listening to Dr. Howell, and he never he never deterred to amaze me when he answers his question with the storytelling, and I like it so much. But you know, when I think about difficult conversations, I want to say they are an inevitable part of life. And whether we are discussing a sensitive topic, like a relationship, or whether we are having a conflict at work, as you started out, Dr. Marcia, that late coming, these conversations can be challenging and they can be uncomfortable. And so this topic today will help us. It's actually going to help me too, because I've learned so much while I'm going through this. Mastering difficult conversation is a valuable skill to have. And that can greatly improve our relationships and our overall well-being. So I say that difficult conversations are different from ordinary conversations. And how I would differentiate them is a difficult conversation is trying to row a boat uphill, and a regular conversation is trying to row that boat downhill. And we can understand going downhill, it's smooth going down, but trying to row uphill, we can understand what's happening. And as we go through, I believe that we're going to understand this context, that most difficult conversations, you have to apply a certain level of wisdom, you have to apply a certain level of empathy, you have to apply a certain level of openness, and you have to be willing, above everything else, to share in this difficult conversation. And that is why so many people walk away from difficult conversation. One good example is a husband come home or a wife come home and someone said, we need to talk. That sounds like it's going to be a difficult conversation. And one person tends to want to walk away. They are not ready to push that boat uphill. So that's what I think about it, Dr. Marcia.
I know we are warming up in here, and these are difficult times and very crucial conversations that we need to be having. But one thing is absolutely sure: difficult conversations, based on what have been said by both of you, are sensitive topics. And it can also include the differing perspective and getting persons to see things your way, or being able to accept how other people see things. There are some of us who say, when we are doing our assessments and so on, we learn that principle where we put the plate in the middle, and it is where people mutually benefit. And sometimes we are encouraged, especially when it is evaluation, to start with the good points. But I want to stress that even when you start with the good points, a difficult conversation is challenging. It is what it is, a difficult conversation. And so no matter how tactful you are and how lovingly confrontational you are, it is a sensitive thing for people, especially when you talk about performance, for example, in the job, when you talk about issues that are recurring, when you talk about having to lay off persons from their jobs, especially now when layoff is really the mix. Those are not easy conversations. And no matter how objective you are, no matter how considerate you are and so on, those conversations can be difficult. Having a breakup where you finally recognize that you have to separate and it is best to love this person from a distance is a very difficult conversation. I don't know, as a couple, a married couple, finance is always a difficult conversation in any relationship, and adjustments have to always be made. So we are saying difficult conversations are difficult, even when you approach it objectively and with love. So I want to ask the next question based on that fact. How do you recognize when it is time to have a difficult conversation? How do you recognize when it is time to have this crucial, very serious, very sensitive, very emotional conversation? In fact, before we answer that question, how do we know that a conversation, even if we started it out very well, has now become a difficult conversation? What are some of the signs that the conversation has become a difficult conversation? We want to answer that question before we go about recognizing when to have a difficult conversation, because there is really a difference. So I want to start with you, Dr. Well, go ahead. When that a conversation has become a difficult conversation, because you might start off very mild, very gentle, and sometimes you start off normal conversations and they become very difficult conversations. How do we know when a conversation has become a difficult conversation?
I'm glad that you leveled that particular question. Every conversation has the potential to become a difficult conversation because of the fact that whenever two or more people are talking, you have different experiences, different perspectives, different biases, and different ways of interpreting and seeing the world. And so for example, if you say to your spouse, why did you pick that color for that outfit? And she has spent a lot of money on that particular outfit, and she took a lot of time and energy to find an outfit, and she thought that she'd made a good choice. By you saying that, she might hear a plethora of different negatives that you did not intend for her to take on. But it might be one of those things that you just hit some buttons or you just triggered something in her. And it could have been from a childhood experience or it could have been from a previous relationship, but you triggered something. So, what are some of the things that you can do, especially if a conversation was not supposed to be difficult, but it became difficult? And how do you know when it's becoming difficult? Well, elevated emotions, elevated heart rate, getting called down on everything you say. That's another thing. If everything you say, it comes back to something that's a little more aggressive than you expected it to be, then that is a good time for you to pause and step back and try to figure out how you're going to attack it. And so there's signs that you can tell. For example, when people are crossing their arms, that is a sign that they're being defensive. If they cross their legs, that is a sign that they're being a little defensive. If they start to lean backwards or step backwards, that is a sign that they're starting to get a little more defensive. If you see the fist start to get clenched, that's a sign you need to run out the room. So there are things that you can see, and those are nonverbal. A lot of those are nonverbal that you can see, but you can also feel the frustration building up when things that you are saying becomes misconstrued. But what I want to add to that is this: if you practice certain techniques, there are things that you can do to make sure that you don't get to that point. My mother, I never heard my parents argue, ever, ever, ever. And listening to the stories of my mother when she was young, she was a tomboy, and then she was very verbal in her way of thinking. But once she got married, she totally turned that backwards. And she said one of the things that she employed was counting to 10 before she opened her mouth. That's one thing that she did. Another thing that she did, she said under extreme circumstances, she would put water in her mouth and she would not swallow that water until she had gotten control of her emotions. So these are some of the things that you can do to make sure that you don't get to that point, especially if you see yourself getting to the point where you have an elevated heart rate, where you're getting cold sweat, where you feel your body's clenching up and stuff like that. Another thing you can do to make sure you don't get to that point is to do what I call a conversational sandwich. If you think of a sandwich as a piece of bread at the top, piece of bread in the middle, and some type of meat in the inside, then you have a positive thing to say about the person on the front end of the conversation at the beginning, and then you give them the uncomfortable thing that you want to say to them, and then you follow that with some type of positives. But I like the way that we work together to solve our problems. That gives them a way out and let them see that they're not excluded and they don't have to work through it by themselves. And so a conversation sandwich can help you deal and get through difficult conversations without being misunderstood. Another thing you can do to make sure you don't get to that point is to talk to be understood, not talk to convince. When you're talking to convince someone, you become frustrated when you can't win them over, or they become frustrated because you're trying to influence them. But if you talk to explain your side, to give understanding to someone else versus trying to convince someone or sway someone, that is another thing you can do to make sure that you don't get to that point. And last but not least, two things: emotional intelligence. If you know that somebody coming to you like that will make you upset, emotional intelligence will tell you, hey, I should not be going to people like that. And so if you don't want people to approach you like that, don't approach people that way. Second thing, empathy. You have to be able to put yourself in other people's shoes. You have to make sure that you're not willing to take more than you're willing to give. And so even as a leader, you have to look at it from the employee standpoint. Yes, it might be policy, but is it a fair policy? Yes, it might be the right thing to do, but is it empathetic? The person might be wrong, but say you can say to them, "Hey, I noticed that for the last couple of days, you have not been doing the work the way you normally do it. Is there something wrong?" And then you might find out they might have a family member that's not doing well, or something has happened. And then using empathy, you can sway them into what you want them to do a lot better, because you approached it with emotional intelligence as well as empathy. So there are a lot of things you can do to make sure you don't start at that point. You have to use intelligence to make sure you just don't poke the bear.
So, all right, good. So we understand that we can look at body language to recognize when a normal conversation is becoming a very difficult conversation. Thank you so much for those solid points: the crossing of the arms and the legs, the intense focus, those types of things that people tend to overlook, and those emotions start railing, and you're starting to feel emotionally uncomfortable also, and physically annoyed. You see those types of things. You see persons who are on edge. You recognize the tension in the room, as you call it. And so we begin to understand that a normal conversation has now become a very difficult one. Let us hear your addition, Dr. Brooks. How do we know when a normal conversation is becoming a difficult one?
Dr. Howell has said so much, and I'm not going to try to repeat anything that he has said as best as possible, because he really pouted it right there.
Very much
But
so.
I want to also add that one of the reasons why difficult conversations become difficult conversations is because most of the time people wait too long to have conversations. What could have been an ordinary conversation then develop into a difficult conversation. And that's why I believe difficult conversations should happen every day. Difficult conversations should happen every day. And let me think about two different scenarios: one at home, one at work. Your spouse is doing something that you do not like, or something that is causing a lack of trust. Or don't wait for 5 months before you bring that up, because that's when the cup has run over and is flowing onto the floor, outside the door, and everywhere. If you had that conversation at the very beginning, maybe it wouldn't end up into a difficult conversation as it would have been when you waited for 3 months and 5 months. Let's think about work. One of your employees constantly coming to work late, and you are in a team meeting. Saying that we want to try to overcome lateness is good, but taking that employee aside when everything is done, or before it happens, and address that matter prevents a difficult conversation from happening and developing into something that it should not be. And so navigating difficult conversations, Dr. Howell and Dr. Marcy and our audience, requires skill and sensitivity.
Yes.
We cannot wait until the bucket is overflowing before we try to have this conversation. They should be a daily part of life. And expressing our personal truth, something that we feel and know that this is going to cause a difficult conversation, expressing it as early as possible, and seeking to understand the other person's perspective also help in managing those conversations when they happen. And the final thing I want to say, that when we go into difficult conversation, let's be mindful of other person's perspective. This is not all about me and all about you. That you're going to have a difficult conversation, and some people will say, I don't care what you think. I am speaking my truth right here. This is a difficult conversation. Is not about one person. Hold on to your emotions. Don't walk into a difficult conversation with your emotions all the way up here. keep your emotions under control when you're going into a difficult conversation.
Very much so. And that's a solid point I don't want us to miss. We sometimes escalate normal conversations into difficult conversations because we feel that only our opinion is important. And sometimes, Dr. Howell, you raised an important point. We do not put ourselves in the next person's shoes. And for those of us who are famous and have been given the medication by the doctor to always speak what is on our mind, we need to change our doctor, because the Bible itself says it's not all truths that must be known. You must know when and how to tell people the truth. We must be able to gauge their personality. And sometimes we must understand that some persons are so deluded in the opinion of themselves that whatever you tell them will not make a difference, because they do not value anybody else's opinion but their own, and they never see anything wrong with them and cannot see no matter how you tell them, because they refuse to see. And those are difficult conversations that you must have. And I must say that when you are having those difficult conversations, that you maintain your calm and composure, because facts do not change when you shout them. Facts do not change if you ignore them. Facts remain facts. And that's the reality. And also, we must make sure that in having difficult conversations, we do not force our values and beliefs on people. We open ourselves to adopt to the other person's perspective. We see things through the eyes and the experience of the other person, and we strike compromise where they are necessary. And so I want to ask the next question, which was the burning question in the room. What are the signs that I need to have those difficult conversations before they become impossible conversations? What signs am I to recognize, the recognizable signs that it is now time to have a difficult conversation? It should not be delayed. Just like what Dr. Brooks says, we are to have them timely and maybe daily, if there needs be, depending on your organization, the persons who you work with, you will know them, depending on your relationships in your home, depending on the nature of your children and their personality traits and their habits and their behavior patterns. How do we look at those and have that crucial know that it is time to have this crucial conversation before it becomes an impossible one? I want to start with you, Dr. Brooks.
I'm just going to say two things, Dr. Marcia. One, whenever you see that there is a misalignment of preset goals or values or a mission or a vision, then there is a time to have a difficult conversation. And I say this because I'm coming back to the home and work. I'm using those two places as my base. At home, we may have an agreement that this is how we spend money. We don't spend over $500 without telling the other person. But one person decide to spend $2,000 without saying anything. And that's a deviation from an agreement. That's a misalignment of our values or our mission or our goals. And so it's time to have a difficult conversation. And it's the same thing at work. We have standards, we have goals, we have values, and I'm wrapping it up in those two places. Whenever there is some kind of deviation, when there is some kind of misalignment, when there is some kind of stray, let me use that word, away from the original goal or intent, then there is time to have a conversation, and it may be a difficult one. Dr. Howell.
Yes. I want to piggyback on something that you said earlier. You talked about if you have difficult conversations every day, then you can slow down some of those things. I want to I want to call that an uncomfortable conversation, because an uncomfortable conversation to me represents something that has not yet manifested itself into a into a difficult conversation. It might be something that brings some distress, but it's not to the extent that is fightable, right? And so to me, having it every day is an uncomfortable conversation. But I had a principal who we would walk across coals and swim across oceans for, because of the way she treated us, because of the way she respected us. And that brings me to another point. A lot of times we have to be preemptive, and this is the second time I've brought this up now, because some people are born confrontational, or over time they've developed that type of attitude. But if you learn to address situations before they get a chance to explode like volcanoes on you, then you can preemptively save yourself a lot of emotional distress, a lot of agony, and a lot of potential harm to your mental being. And another thing that you brought up was the fact that our beliefs and values must be in alignment. And I want to separate our beliefs and our values, because a lot of times our beliefs are grounded in our thoughts, and our thoughts are governed by our perspective. So you have to make sure that the truth that you believe is a rational truth, and not a truth that's grounded in emotions. A lot of times we might have a strong feeling about something, and we take it as a belief and as a value, when in actuality they're based on our perspective. And so you have to use empathy to make sure that the way that my thought processes work is similar to someone else's thought processes. Because if I'm trying to convey to you how I am seeing things, and I'm a boss, and I'm not taking into consideration how you were brought up and how you process and interpret things, then I will run into the situation where I might look as a boss who is unempathetic, and I might look like someone who doesn't care about people. And so you have to make sure that your truths are actually valid truths, and they're not based in emotions. So that to me is a big thing. You have to make sure that your uncomfortable conversations come before the difficult conversations. You have to be willing to be preemptive. You can't always be going into battle. Sometimes you have to be diplomatic and sit down. There's a time for diplomacy, and then there's a time to fight. There's some people, they're ready to fight every time. Oh, you want me to tell something? Oh, you got to say something to someone? Let me do it. I want to be the one to do it, because I got something I have to tell them, that because I got some stuff to let out of my head because of what they did to me a year ago. And so we have to make sure that we're not being emotional when it comes to this whole difficult conversation. And like you said, if it's a spouse and they say we need to talk, that does not mean it's the end of the world. It could just be something that needs to be realigned. Now, if you went out and spent $2,000 when your limit was $500, then that is a gross infraction of the covenant between the two of you all. And so, yeah, you will have a difficult conversation, and it'll be more than uncomfortable, And so you have to look at a lot of different factors when you talk about difficult conversations, because a lot of times our information is flawed.
Okay, there we go. Are you hearing me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes. Something went wrong with I'm trying to get my camera back on. Oh Lord. Okay. I am trying very hard to get
Go
it back.
ahead. Go ahead and speak without it, Dr. Marcy. As soon as
Okay,
you get
fine. So we are happy for that inclusion, Dr. Howell, on the uncomfortable conversation, because difficult conversations, there is a difference, it seems, between the difficult conversations and the uncomfortable conversations. I want to stress three things though, and I want to make sure that when we recognize that when a behavior has changed and has become persistent in how it is altered according to Dr. Brooks, and I'm going right there because I agree, then we have to make sure that we see that as a need to have a difficult conversation. The next thing that we want to look at also is that we want to look at the recurring behaviors that recur even when you make and diplomatically try to speak to the person one by personally or on different occasions. You give hints, you give a certain type of warning, you give notification, you try to assist the person and there is no change, then we also need to have a difficult conversation. And finally, I want to put in that anything that makes you emotionally or physically uncomfortable or mentally detached, it's time to have a difficult conversation. So we want to put those in, especially for those of us who are in an industry. The next question that I want to ask, though, that I find to be very important, does your cultural habits or social norms or political dispensations contribute or take away from difficult conversations? How does these things, your social impact, the cultural impact, the political implications, how does that help us to navigate or prevent us from successfully navigating difficult conversations? Do you want to start, Dr. Brooks?
Dr. Marcia, thank you so much. You know, in everything, culture play a significant part. I was born and raised in Jamaica. And I say one of the best countries in the world. And we manage difficult conversations different from how most other persons. We are from a laid back culture. So we could be walking down the road and we're having a difficult conversation and nobody recognizes that we're having a difficult conversation because that's our culture. Some another culture, they probably have to set a meeting, a place and time for and they have to come to the table and they have to bring their book and their pen in order to get this thing resolved or to have this conversation. So culture play a significant role in how people manage. Again, there are some cultures that a difficult conversation can be so escalated that you're wondering if there's a world war going on. And in other cultures, it is always behind a closed door, so you never hear or know that something difficult is going on behind those doors. So I say yes to culture. It plays a significant role in how we manage these conversations. And I want to add to that something I said earlier about expressing personal truth and understanding others' perspective. And we talk about culture. I want to also talk about social and individual preferences are also essential parts of these difficult conversation. My preference would be to walk down the road. I'm just using an example and have it. But the other person's preference is to have it behind a closed door. Nobody should hear us. So by fostering this kind of communication and also by seeking to bring empathy as the bridge, we can be able to have these difficult conversations. We can provide that opportunity to learn from each other. And then in doing that, we gain a deeper understanding of each person's viewpoints. So that's what I wanted to add right there.
So it does have an impact, and it has a very important impact, crucial impact on our conversations. Dr. Howell, let's hear your take on it.
As an educator, one of the things that I saw, like Dr. Janice, I started in the Caribbean. I started my matriculation in Barbados, but I went to England before I came to America, and so I've been educated on in 3 different countries. And one of the things I've noticed, especially in the classroom, in the Caribbean, when you're talking to a kid and you are really laying into them, most of the time they put their head down as a form of shame. If you look at the Asian culture, when someone is being accosted, they put their head down, they bow because that's a sign of shame. But in American culture, we tell you, look me in the face, look me in the eyes. You know, I want to see what you're thinking, you know, and so 2 different cultures. You know, one culture expects you to look them in the eyes, another one expects you to look down. And then when you get into the workplace, you're talking to someone and it's a difficult conversation and they're not looking at you and you're taking it as a sign of disrespect. And so it is easy to look at a conversation and feel like this person's not taking me seriously. They won't even look me in the eyes. Or you might go to a place like Asia. If you look at the movie The Karate Kid, an American family ended up in Asia and they had to learn to adapt. So you are in the business setting and you're trying to adapt. Your boss is telling you something, you looking them in the eye. That's a sign of disrespect. You know, especially when they are telling you about something you need to work on. And so culture does play a big part. There's some cultures that are very loud when they're talking to other people, and there's some cultures that are very quiet. And like Dr. Brooks said, they want to pull you in the room and talk to you. Some people don't mind being spoken to in public. Some people want to be spoken to, especially something that's embarrassing, in private. And so you have to be cognizant of that. And both sides have to be able to communicate to each other how they will prefer the meeting to go or how they will prefer the conversation to go. So you have to communicate. And if you look at it from a spouse standpoint, you have to communicate what you want. You can't say they should have known, which comes up quite a bit. Why should I have to tell you that? You're grown, you should know. People grow up differently and you have to be mindful of that. And so you add fuel to the fire when you assume that other people should know what you're thinking. And that's in the private as well as personal and relational. And then the next thing I want to say is boundaries. Some cultures have more boundaries than others. So in some cultures, for example, the British are very uptight. And so you don't say to, you don't, when you ask a British person, how's your day going? They will say, fine. You say that in Black America, they will say, well, let me tell you what happened. My child did this and I was upset and this, that, and you get a whole soliloquy. And so there are certain cultures that are very, very private and their boundaries are very, very tight. In America, you start talking about politics, people will talk about their personal problems before they will talk about politics in this country, because people get very personal and very emotional when it comes to the 2 parties that are available for people to vote about. And so at that point in time, you have to understand that if you are working in a diverse situation, you have to know a little bit about each one of those cultures that you're interacting with so that you do not cross certain boundaries. You do not miscommunicate. You do not misrepresent. So cultural does play a big role in how you communicate and how difficult or uncomfortable conversations need to be addressed.
Very good. So we will agree that cultural norms, social norms, and cultural practices and political preferences can also dictate the level of difficulty of a conversation. We are also learning from what you're saying that some persons like you when you get to the point immediately, and some want you to tactfully and gradually carry them to the conclusion or the resolution. Very important, very, very important. And so we need to settle in and we need to understand the different cultures, the social norms, the preferences, and how we go about having these difficult conversations so that we get the desired outcome that we need, which is really change, which is really connection, which is really meaningful relationships and so on. So since we are on the brink of the time and are coming on to the end, and my granddaughter is joining in the conversation, I want to ask and laughing too when she feels that you have given enough humor to the situation, Dr. Howell and Dr. Brooks. I want to say no, because we don't do these programs to profile ourselves and to show off. We do it to benefit people and to benefit from persons. And so we want to ask now, what are some of the strategies that we can use to navigate a difficult conversation to come to a desired outcome that people, the persons involved, mutually benefit, where we can have engagement and participation, where people can feel included, where people can feel supported and really not maligned. What are some of the strategies that we can use to do that? We're going to take two from each person. I want to start first by saying that we need to secure the proper time and the proper space. Sometimes conversations could have turned out much better if the setting was different and the location. And when I say the setting, I mean the emotional as well as the physical and mental setting. We must gauge the right time when we really can have a conversation. You cannot have a conversation with a leader when that leader is stressed or dealing with a crisis. You can't come with a conversation. It's likely to become very difficult when you come with certain high-pressed ultimatums or requests when a leader is going through a crisis. That's not the proper time or the place. You can also, when persons cannot have certain conversations out in the open, so you must remain calm and composed, and you must lead the person to, even if the person sometimes, Dr. Howell and Dr. Brooks, might be so emotional, so charged up that they feel that they must have that conversation in the open. You must be so calm and composed that you lead the person to a quiet and private place to have a private conversation that they think must be a public one. And so that's what I mean by time and space. The next thing that I want us to look at is that we must focus on the solution and not spend all the time highlighting whatever problem or issue it is. So we want to recognize the issue or the problem, because you cannot solve a problem if you do not know what it is. But some of us belabor a problem and an issue instead of belaboring the solution that we can all come to. Dr. Brooks, your two.
Wow, two excellent points, and Dr. Marcia. My two I would want to add is that we should be prepared for different reactions. And everyone will react differently in a difficult conversation. And some persons may become defensive. Others may just shut down and stop talking. Some persons may just be smiling away and nodding and shaking their head, and they're not saying anything. So we have to be prepared for the different reactions. And it is essential that when we go into this conversation, we are prepared, because if we are not prepared, then we will start to feel different emotions rising up. So the best thing to do is to stay calm and try to steer the conversation always to the topic of discussion. And the second point I want to make is end on a positive note. Whenever you have a difficult conversation, try to end on a positive note. No matter how difficult the conversation may be, try to end on a positive note. Express your appreciation, because sometimes you don't have to become enemies after you leave a difficult conversation. Express appreciation for the person's willingness to have come to the conversation with you and towards finding some kind of resolution. And this can help to maintain a cordial relationship and positive relationship after the difficult conversation. So those are my 2 points. Watch for the reactions and end on a positive note.
Very good, very good. We like that. And one of the things that I want to raise before Dr. Howell comes in is that I like what you say. Show your appreciation that that person actually spent the time to have that discussion with you. And even if the results are not what you want, still appreciate the fact that even if they nod their heads, even if they didn't say anything, the conversation took place and persons listened and they acknowledge even by the nodding of the head. That's very, very important. Show your appreciation. Yes, Dr. Howell, let's hear you now.
Yes, I have two words: plan and look. You're gonna plan ahead of time because you're gonna look for what is my desired intention and what is my desired outcome. Why is that important? Because it's going to come back in what you're looking for in the end. So you have to make sure that you stay on topic. I'm only going to talk. I'm only going to bring up things that are pertinent to what my intention is and what my outcome is. So identify what you want to be said and what you want the outcome to be. And then after that, look for areas of commonality where you can agree on. Look for its similarities, things that you have in common. Build a rapport. You remember I spoke about that principle that had a rapport with each one of us, and we would go to the brinks of hell and back for her because we knew she had our back. That's step number one. Now to look, what are you looking for? You're looking to make sure you're using the proper language based on culture, based on your interaction with the people previously, based on what you're trying to get accomplished. If you know someone is very aggressive and you're speaking to someone that's aggressive, don't fight fire with fire. Don't see who can be the loudest and most aggressive and think that you're going to get stuff solved that way. So look for the language that you're going to use to get the best point across. When you looked at Jesus, when that woman was being accosted and they had the rocks ready to throw at her, the prostitute, he wrote down in the sand what they were all struggling with. He didn't fight fire with fire. He didn't pick up a bigger rock to throw at them. He got quiet and he looked at them based on their emotions and he wrote down what they needed to deal with. Your posture, look for your posture, your nonverbal communication, because most of what we say, 90+%, is nonverbal. Look for their nonverbal to make sure you can check the tone and manage the tone of that conversation. And last but not least, look for the most empathetic way to address that situation so that you are putting yourselves in their shoes to make sure that when you are done, like the lady said, there is no hard feelings left. You're not trying to create an enemy. You're trying to create a better workspace. You're trying to create a better friendship. You're trying to create a better relationship. And so regardless of what you're trying to do, you, based on your intentions, the other person might have other intentions, but based on your intentions, you must have the empathy to make sure you're not burning bridges.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. So we are to find common ground. We are to reframe negative language. We are to use proper time, find the proper time and space. We are to use I statements. We are to have empathy and compassion. We are to put ourselves in the place of the other. We are to accept person's perspective. We are to actively listen, meaning we are to watch those things that are said and pay keen attention to those things that are not said. We are to also make sure that we show appreciation, and we must also ensure that we prepare for different reactions. Very, very important, very beneficial, and I hope my audience has taken key as to how they can improve, navigate, and maneuver difficult conversation to serve a positive purpose and to create meaningful connections and to improve productivity and client and customer relations. So there is no differentiation, to ensure that inclusiveness is secured in that space, and to make sure that respect and trust is always a value as a mission and vision in that organization, in that relationship, in that home. Your final points, Dr. Brooks, and then Dr. Howell.
So my final point is mastering the art of difficult conversations takes practice and it takes patience. And as you said, Dr. Marcia, if they follow these tips and strategies that we have given them, that will greatly improve their communication skills, and it will help them to handle these challenging conversations, whether it's at home, work, wherever you go, church, school, wherever. Remember always, this is my final point, to manage these conversations with empathy, with confidence, and with grace. Always knowing that you could be on the other end of that conversation and not in the place where you are at the point in time. So remember, give grace and you will receive grace.
Very powerful, Dr. Howell. Very powerful. We have touched some powerful points today. We have given a lot of food for thought. Let's hear your final points, Dr. Howell.
Well, I think I've said a lot already. So what I'm going to say is avoidance leads to more stress and a potential for an explosive conversation. So like Dr. Janice said earlier, have those uncomfortable conversations before they become difficult conversations. And that way you can minimize your stress on a daily basis. Don't let things build up, because once they build up, people tend to include things that don't need to be included in the conversation. And people tend to let their emotions take the best of them, and you end up being less productive.
So very much so, very much so. And I am in full agreement. I think we have had a very wholesome discussion today. And I want to add my little bit by saying that when we are having difficult conversations, we must make sure and ensure that we maintain our dignity and the dignity of the other person. If it gets to the point where we begin to attack each other, credibility, integrity, and so on, I think we must take a break, take a step back, so that we preserve the relationship. The Bible says, and I want to end on these two notes, the Bible talks about being able to have wholesome conversations. And it says in Ephesians 4 verse 29, do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. It also says a gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. There are many times when we are not able to get a gentle answer from those who we are having this discussion with. But the key is to remain calm and composed. Let those who come behind us find us faithful. We hope that we have helped leaders in the home, in the community, in your church, and also in your organization to understand that difficult conversations is inevitable, but your response can be greater than the conversation itself. And the way for your response to be greater is that you make sure that the connection is there, and respected, and can walk away. And I can't get up, but we want to live with. And this blend is that you use what we called our bugger lime with your ginger, a little touch of cucumber, and you are very much gone clear for controlling and calming your personality. If you have it before you have a difficult conversation, you will remain calm, cool, and collective right to the end, no matter what force is braced against you and how emotional people become. Try it and you will be better for it. We thank you all for joining us. And again, I am Dr. Marcia Thomas. I am a Christian leadership consultant, coach, trainer, and author. And I empower Christian career professionals, especially females, who feel stuck, unproductive, or overwhelmed, to garner 110% more resilience and to remain faith-fueled and exceptional in a very testy and trying work environment. Dr. Howell, go ahead, sir.
Yes, I'm a relationship, leadership, and all around life purpose coach, and I help people find a way to deal with all of the relationships that they have in their life.
Dr. Brooks.
Don't forget your chamomile tea with your lemon in it. That helps you before you have a difficult conversation to stay calm as well.
So,
I'm Dr. Janice. I am a leadership consultant and coach. I help to shift mindsets so that you will have a strategy to take you through every aspect of your life. Back to you, Dr. Marcia.
so here we have it. As consultants, trainers, and life coaches, we change lives, we change outcomes, and we do it together. May you have a great day and a great weekend. And if you need to contact us, we practice separately and we also have a collaboration together. So if you need us, you can book us on our handles on Instagram, on Facebook, LinkedIn, and also on our website, drtpmotivate2.com, drjanisbrooks.com, and drseafordhowell.com. Did I get it right, Dr. Howell?
Actually, it's just siegfriedhowell.com.
Very much so. And
Yeah.
there we have it. And so we are leaving this room at this time. And thank you so much for having my granddaughter along. I appreciate you all for joining us. And next week, prepare for another burning, sizzling, hot topic that I'm sure will change your life. God bless you all.
Bye-bye.